RWBY Ice Queendom is the RWBY remake slash spin-off slash reboot that some people asked for, everyone wanted, and no one expected. You know, everything that the DC crossover movie isn't. I'm kidding, I will reserve all actual judgment until the movie's actually out. So what is Ice Queendom? Well, it's an alternate, canon adjacent story set within the RWBY universe. As with all things that readdress the source material, it begs the question, is new thing better than old thing? Well, unlike anime Twitter discourse, the answer to that is a little more complicated than just labeling said thing mid, getting ratioed, and calling it a day. And in this complexity, the begged question begs the question, is that question even worth asking in the first place? For my part, as far as canon adjacent stories go, while RWBY Ice Queendom is far from a perfect show, there is a solid effort to tell a story set in the RWBYverse here. And I think there's a lot of potential here for future projects. Pending the sale of these super expensive Blu-ray boxes, I guess. But before I proceed, I really don't think it's possible for me to be 100% objective in writing this video. For other shows, maybe. For RWBY, So rather than try and do this ridiculous exercise of divorcing my history with the show and what it means to me, I'll just lay it out here so that it might be a tiny little bit more clear where I'm coming from. I became a fan of Rooster Teeth in 2006. 12-year-old me spent an entire summer binging Red vs. Blue. I legitimately learned most swear words from Bernie Burns. Thanks, Bernie. I also became a fan of Monty Oum not too long after. A buddy of mine showed me Haloid in 2007 and it blew me away. So naturally when the two came together, it was the collab to end all collabs. So to say I'm a tiny bit invested in RWBY would be a drastic understatement. That said, being a fan and being critical of the media that you're watching are not mutually exclusive. I do acknowledge that RWBY is with its fair share of issues, but I enjoy the show all the same. Also, being a critic and being a jerk are also not mutually exclusive. Something that I try to be aware of since generally the folks finding videos on a thing generally value said thing quite a bit. Now back to Ice Queendom. RWBY's biggest advantage and disadvantage is that it is a CG show. Stylistically, this is what enabled some of the insane action sequences, but that also meant some animation jank at times. And how does that hold up in 2D for Ice Queendom? Stylistically, this is what enabled some of the insane action sequences, but that also meant some animation jank at times. Yes, the video repeated just now, and yes, that was intentional. More on that in a sec. Art-wise, all of the characters look on point and reflective of their 3D counterparts, except for the eyes. I don't know if it's just me, but something just really seems off. Like they have this kind of lifeless look to them. I don't know, I just really can't quite put my finger on it, but something's just giving me that Uncanny Valley vibe. Which, to me again, was sort of a problem because eyes are so incredibly important in how living things emote. As for the animation itself, foreground animation for the most part is decent on the whole, but Ice Queendom seems to suffer from a serious lack of background action. This leads to a ton of shots feeling rather flat. While this might not be readily apparent in static settings like the girls' dorm room, it makes shots of Vale or Beacon look a lot more lifeless than they really are. I don't mean this as a dig on Ice Queendom specifically, since this is usually a problem in most seasonal anime. Like, these scenes have people in them, but they may as well be mannequins given how stiff they are. People need to look and behave like people. The show kind of makes up for this in the fight scenes. This is seemingly where all the time and attention went, which again, isn't unusual for seasonal anime. That said, there is a pretty big variance in fight quality. When the fights are good, they are a Sakuga fest and the fights flow like water. But I do wish that they would hang out on the wide shot just a tiny bit more in some of these scenes. When the fights are kinda mid, the art quality drops off quite a bit. Yes, production realities are a thing, but considering the apex of the show's fight animations, it's really difficult to ask your viewers to accept this as a compromise. And when the fight quality is bad, oh boy. It's not a seasonal anime unless there are a couple of hiccups. Shaft's thing here seems to be their sudden usage of CG characters and shots, which just looks incredibly jarring. The girls in this fight legitimately look like they were ripped from a non-existent RWBY PS2 game. Literally off-model to an extreme. But speaking of that, there are times in 2D when art quality noticeably drops off and characters go off-model once again. Look at this comparison of Tai during the premiere and the secondary broadcast. Or this fight scene right here. It legitimately felt like there was a shot or two missing, and going by the storyboards posted on Twitter, that seems to have been the case. While a Blu-ray release might fix some of these minor issues, I don't expect a massive facelift in terms of overall animation quality, particularly in terms of background animation. Then there's the opening and ending. While the ending does make some effort at doing some sort of stylized storytelling, the opening is basically clips from the first few episodes with a motion graphics treatment. While there are no hard and fast rules as to what an opening should be, I feel like this was a missed opportunity. And even RWBY proper uses its openings to do some sort of storytelling, foreshadowing, or even throwing out red herrings. Comparing the two, if we're not accounting for 2D versus 3D preferences, I do think that RWBY proper does edge out over Ice Queendom. I think the 2D style produces fight scenes that are on par with their 3D counterparts at times, but overall it's just super inconsistent. Okay, this topic feels like a bit of a non-starter for the Japanese stuff since my Nihongo is definitely not Jozu enough to be evaluating this. But here we go. While more of a writing and direction thing, what is notable here is the characterization. Ruby's locked into being an Imoto, Weiss is a tsundere, Blake's a Kuroneko, and Yang's a Gyaru.
Hello.
It can feel a little one note at times, but the voice actors hit those one notes incredibly well. The highlight moments are definitely when they can break from their characters' archetypes. For Ruby, that's when she gains confidence and becomes more like the team leader we're familiar with. For Weiss, it's when she's being a dork. For Blake, it's being able to let her guard down. For Yang, she has to learn how to let go of Ruby and let her be her own person. Which is alright, but I was kind of hoping for some individual development from her as well. Like maybe some mommy issues, but then again, that could be a nightmare world unto itself. As for the dub, it's more of a mixed bag. As far as I can tell, this is Rooster Teeth's first outing doing a dub, so I want to take this moment to take my hat off to them for learning how to do this on the fly. There's a lot of work and intricacies that go into this sort of thing, behind the mic and on the engineering side. I don't have the time in this video to explain all of it, but believe me, there is so much more than you think that goes into dubbing anime. But maybe that's a video for the future. If you go back and rewatch Volume 1, you'll definitely notice that Ruby's voice was pitched down a little. It was only later on when Lindsay Jones refined her Ruby voice. And hearing it here in Volume 1 material is great. I can't explain it in words, so here's a meme.
Oh my gosh, you're adorable!
But there are times when some reads are questionable. For instance, Professor Ozpin. Now I am something of an Ozpin connoisseur myself. And is it me, or is Professor Ozpin more creepy here? I mean like, more than the original scene. If that's at all possible. And then there's this kind of weird passive-aggressive sass that he gives Shion Zaiden, which...
Welcome. I was under the impression that you were out hunting game, Shion Zaiden.
And that hunt has brought me here, Professor.
Ayo, RT. The fuck, dudes? Sassy Ozpin is property of Ruby Thoughts. Gonna need some residuals on that concept. If it's not obvious, I'm joking. And for the rest of the cast, there are some times when there's just a notable lack of energy. Now, I have dabbled with fan dubbing stuff, and I can tell you, right off the bat, it is incredibly difficult and slightly awkward if you don't practice this skill often. And I don't have the credits on me right now at this moment in time, but maybe consulting with a professional ADR scriptwriter would have helped. Because some of these lines just need a little bit more help, like maybe there's a different word combination or delivery that could have been gone for. Again, I'm not sure, I'm just speculating, and it also might have been time and budget constraints. Some of these voice actors do have full-time jobs aside from voice acting, so I can understand on that front. But once again, at the end of the day, I just can't help but want more out of the dub because this is the show's native language and it is the language that most people discovered it in. In terms of writing, my hope for this canon-adjacent story was to flesh out the Beacon arc even more. You see, back in the good old days, there wasn't much Ruby to go around on account of the shoestring budget. And while more budget and runtime isn't a surefire way to solve every problem, it sure gives you a heck more of a fighting chance. What I wanted specifically were more character interactions and developments. Those would have gone a long way. For example, You know, maybe like not waiting 7 more volumes for Blake and Ruby to have another conversation? Thankfully, we do get some of that, even if some of it is surface level. Personally, I think it's important to have a mix of moments, a good balance of slice of life moments and deep heart-to-hearts. If you have too much of the former, you run the risk of being boring. If you have too much of the latter, well, congrats, you're a soap opera telling the audience what feelings they should be feeling towards these characters. And no one wants that. The overall arc of Ice Queendom does give us moments to explore the characters more. Ruby's constantly dealing with her insecurities as a leader, culminating in a congratulations scene. Blake confronts her past with the White Fang and what it means to move forward. Yang, I actually don't remember anything as I'm writing this and as I'm recording this, but I was kind of hoping for some mommy issues, but then again, that could be a nightmare in its own right. And then there's Weiss, Ruby's darling for character development. And man, is there a lot to unpack here. Like seriously, that could be its own video, but TLDR, Weiss Schnee is a big gay racist in her nightmares. I wonder how that sounds out of context. And that was the good to mixed stuff, but it isn't a Ruby YouTube video if some questionable writing decisions aren't brought up. The pacing is probably the biggest issue for me here, and at the risk of repeating my Genlock rant, the start is super fast. A standout moment for that was when we basically see Team Juniper meet and go from almost strangers to BFFs in the span of 10 minutes of screen time. To be fair, they do fight together and that could help create some bonds, but frankly, if you're coming in fresh, that might not feel like enough. However, if you are well acquainted with Ruby, like I am, then this would have felt a little less jarring, but kinda not really. And this is where the show kinda gets me. It seems to be quite selective on what prior Ruby knowledge it chooses to leverage, and I really don't know how well this will hold up if you're coming in blind. Case in point, the Team Juniper thing, or Penny showing up and not really contributing all that much to the plot. What we do get out of Penny is her introduction, a fight sequence that is not shown, and if that was it, I don't really see the utility of bringing this character in. If there is a second season of this, maybe Penny could have been brought in then. This seems to have been an effort to get us into the nightmare world as soon as possible, which to be fair, the world is pretty damn cool, but like a guest that shows up too early, it seems to not really have any idea what to do once it gets there. By about the 3/4 mark, the resolution of Weiss's nightmare was really starting to drag, and the kid Weiss's or shouts of started to lose their novelty. While there is some pretty good action and a ton of little things to help with Weiss's characterization along the way, again, there were just some really odd pacing decisions. Like this cut from episode 9 to episode 10. We get this super awesome moment where Nightmare Blake shows up and starts to kick ass. Then in the next episode, we immediately kill the pace with this long dialogue scene. And I'm not gonna guess at what Blake and Yang were doing in the interim because it seems that Blake forgot to put her pants on. And lastly, Silver Eyes. I don't really know how to feel about this. Some folks are of the opinion that the way it's done in Ruby proper feels a bit like a Deus Ex Machina moment, but the execution in that moment had a lot more emotional weight behind it. And it's not like this moment right here isn't without emotional weight either. I just don't think it's portrayed as clearly. The stakes here are similar. This is indeed a life or death scenario, just like in Volume 3. Okay, maybe not as many people are dying, but still, we don't really get clued into the gravity of the situation here. As cliche as it would have been, maybe a quick anime flashback with Ruby and Weiss moments here would have been helpful. Now, the last point I have is what I'm gonna call the, attempted Gendoization of Ozpin. For my fellow Eva fans, yep, that is a term now. Only one problem with this here, it doesn't really square with Ozpin's forgiving nature to come down this hard on Blake. Ozpin believes in second chances, or in his case, 1,000th chances. I suppose you could argue that this is canon adjacent, and that the writers don't really need to adhere fully to each characterization, but I don't know, it just doesn't really track with how everyone is more or less themselves, and Ozpin is the one that stands out. I don't know, maybe I'm just too close to the source material to make an accurate call on this one. And it is decision time. How does Ice Queendom compare? I'd say in many areas there are clear upgrades. The voice acting is much improved and the written character interactions are given much more time to breathe. Then there are areas where it's more of a mixed bag. The well-animated fight scenes when they're there are super impressive, but there are just too few of them to make up for the huge variance in quality. But overall, RWBY's first big on-screen spinoff had massive potential, and while it didn't get everything right, hopefully it will have resonated enough and paved the way for future projects. Alright, and there you have it, my thoughts on RWBY Ice Queendom. What did you think of the show? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.